Okay, shall we go?
Yes, please.
Warning, this episode does contain domestic violence. Hi, Cara.
Hi.
How are you?
I am very well, thank you. And yourself?
I'm good, thank you. The sun is out, we're shining, spring is here. I
Woo.
think I think March is one of my favorite months of the year.
Is it that cusp thing where you're like, it's happening? It's
Yeah,
light
you
out
can
after work.
feel
Woo.
you feel the sun in your face and you're like, "Oh, I am human." Like,
Yeah. Shake off that
yeah.
winter of rest and gloom.
I
Yes.
was very bold yesterday and I went outside without a coat. I
Mm.
know that was a big deal.
Like out, like away from the home.
I went to get my injection.
Good stuff.
I did fall over yesterday though. I was
Oh,
clean. I was on a chair, cleaning cobwebs, and I missed my foot in, and I slammed like on the floor, and all my right hand side is now bruised.
oh,
And
Christ.
this happened.
Horrible.
Yeah, this happened just before the injection, right? So I was like, please don't touch this arm.
Oh, I'm not
That's
happy with you
really
standing on
sweet.
a chair. Nobody should be standing on a chair.
I didn't even think about it. There was no risk assessment.
This is why you need old people in your life, because I'm
Yeah.
here to tell you, don't stand on a chair.
I love how you think you're old. That's so funny.
I'm half a century old. I earned this. I am.
Hey.
I've been
Women
kicking
of have you
around.
seen those t-shirts that are about now? Greg Wallace has done his thing and it's women of a certain age versus the patriarchy. And I was like, yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you want to hear a story?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Brilliant. Hopefully our listeners will as well. Welcome to She Changed History. We didn't say that at the top. Hi, come along.
Hello.
Hello. You got me and Cara today. And I'm going to share a story with you about a very just wild, insane story from a lady called Caroline Norton. Have you heard of Caroline Norton before?
No, it's not a name that I knew.
All right, let's go on a ride. Got a little intro for you. Her children, her life ripped away, promises whispered, then brutally broken. This is the story of a mother's desperate fight to see her children, a fight against a husband, against a system, against the very laws that stole her sons, and in one case to never be seen again. Prepare to witness the heart-wrenching struggle of Caroline Norton and how she used this torment to reform divorce law for all of England's women.
Wow. Oh my God.
Yeah,
That's
heavy. So, sources today, I found this story in an amazing book called Difficult Women by Helen Lewis, a BBC article on Caroline Norton, a Britannica article, which we love using Britannica here, actually an Open University article, and I actually know the lecturer who wrote it, which is really cool.
oh,
EnglishHeritage.org, and a few other ones to learn about some of the context. We are in Victorian England. The suffragette movement is often seen as like the pioneering turning point for female struggle, basically. But the generation before that actually had done a lot of the campaigning. Women's rights were actually fought long before the suffragettes, and that's not taken away from anything the suffragettes did. It's just
sure.
really interesting, this whole foundational period that we don't really talk about. So we're going to be in high society because that makes sense that women in high society are more likely to be in rooms where they can change the law. So Caroline Sheridan was her maiden name. She was born in London on the 22nd of March 1808. It turns out she's actually the granddaughter of a famous playwright called Richard Brinson Sheridan. Actually, her father died when she was quite young, so 8 years old. That's not uncommon for our stories. There tends to be a loss of a parent quite early on sometimes because what that often leads to is serious financial problems. Um,
Right.
Her father, he died quite young. He left, get this, four sons and three daughters, no savings, and a modest pension
Oh my days. Oh,
in
okay. So
high
he
society.
he thought I'll be around to provide for everybody, and then one reason or another, he vanishes, and suddenly there's this family of seven children. I just
Seven children,
made
yeah.
that. Oof. The
Yes.
mother. Oh my gosh.
Exactly. So the widow of Richard was quite lucky because she was offered grace and favour, which came in the forms of an apartment in Hampton Court. So she got lodgings in Hampton Court because this playwright was so well known and respected in
Oh, I
society.
see.
She actually got lucky, I think. It's not like she had
Yeah,
many
she was,
options.
yes, right up Schitt's Creek. Let's be
Hmm.
quite honest. Seven is a
Yeah.
lot of mouths to feed.
for sure. Caroline then grew up, so she was in her teens. She enjoys writing. She wrote a couple of novels and poetry, and these were well respected within society. Some of them actually called her the female Byron. So she was
Oh.
very, it was good what she was producing, which is great. Caroline herself is known to be quick witted, vivacious, and an artisan of the wig. Do you know what the wigs are?
All I know is that
Yeah.
it's spelled WHIG. So we're not
That's
talking about a
it. We're not
headwear.
talking about that.
Beyond
Yeah.
that, not a
So
clue.
this is a whole part of history that I didn't know about. The Whigs, the name Whigs was derived from the English anti-monarchist and opposed Catholic
Mm,
emancipation
yeah, yeah.
party in the UK, but it actually was founded in the USA. It was a USA party.
Oh, I didn't
Between
know.
the, I
Come
don't know
on.
though, because I don't think they really achieved much. So, between the 1680s and the 1850s, the Whigs contested power with their rivals, who in that time were the Tories. Over time, the Whigs became the Liberal Party, and they merged with parties like the Radicals in the 1850s. So the
Okay.
Whigs joined these others, and the Liberal Party was formed. But at that time, which was 1886, many Whigs left the Liberal Party over the issue of Irish Home Rule. So that's how the Liberal Unionist Party started. Eventually, they were swallowed up by the Conservative Party in 1912. So it's a really
Okay.
brief part of history where there was this anti Tory subculture kind of forming.
I'm hearing between that and these women taking their foundational steps, it sounds like a time when there was an established norm and maybe no real organized movements to speak of yet. And these are the people lighting the touch paper. And this is where you start to gain momentum to resist these established, maybe unfair structural norms.
Yeah. I'm going into the weeks a small bit just there because it's really important later on. And
Cool.
I think because of what you're saying, is because they're seen as this unorganized, left wing, unfounded values. But it's really interesting they do form into the Liberal Unionist Party, which then forms into the Conservative Party as time goes on.
Yeah.
But just keeping in mind that Whigs are anti monarchist and Catholic emancipation. As it with all high societies, when the girls are old enough, they get entered into polite society in London. So we're thinking debutante balls, we're thinking very Bridgerton vibes, the ton, that kind of thing. Because there were three sisters, they were known very well within society as the Three Graces. And because of that, there was quite a lot of pressure for them to marry off as well. So it was almost like the sisters were almost in competition with each other a little bit because the mum was desperate for the
Right.
dowry so she
To
could.
secure their future. And
For sure.
yeah.
So there was a lot of pressure on these poor girls when they're entering society. So Helen, who is the eldest daughter, there's a quote here that Georgina, is the beauty. Caroline's the wit, and I, Helen, ought to be the good one, but I am not. So she found that
Oh,
she was struggling, I think, with this pressure of society. Um, these three women, I think it's fair to say they're well educated, and you can see that throughout Caroline's story. Caroline wasn't a feminist. She didn't believe in equality for women. She was spoken about women should know their place, which is a kind of grating point on what we're going to talk about. So just have that in the back of your mind as well. So, like I said, with lots of children and not many resources, it was really important that the three girls marry and they marry well. By convention, it was the eldest sister must be married first. So that's how it should roll in society. And Georgina was the youngest, but she was also the most beautiful, like we said in Helen's quote. I think Caroline and Helen therefore felt a lot of pressure to get married first because they knew that everyone was going to be chasing Georgina,
right. So
basically.
they almost wanted to like just clear the runway so that
But also that I
oh
think that was me in that situation. I would have been so jealous. I would have been so
yeah,
jealous of
just
Georgina and her beauty.
yeah, it must have been incredibly difficult for them because presumably they probably really loved each other. But then there's
Mhm.
that pressure that almost pits them against one another. That's
Yeah.
terrible.
Which you don't see in Bridgerton. There's not that vibe in Bridgerton because obviously there's lots of children in the Bridgerton family, but actually the
Okay.
competition between the children is something I haven't seen in that series anyway. So that's really interesting that this dynamic must have been there, like it must have been in high
Yeah.
society at the time, but isn't shown in popular culture. So everyone's focused on Georgina because she's the prettiest. Caroline herself was quite popular, but she was mostly popular with older men because they appreciated her wit. She was known to use sarcasm, and the younger men didn't really know how to handle this, so they were less
Oh,
interested in her.
bless them.
Yeah. She met lots of people in the London season, but only George Norton came forward. He was called the Honourable George Norton. He was brother of Lord Grantley, so he was quite high standing and he proposed marriage. So this is the only option Caroline has got, and she's got this pressure, like you say, to clear the runway for Georgina. The family didn't, the Sheridans didn't know much about him beyond the fact that he was well connected because of his brother Lord Grantley, and therefore his income was vouched for. He was a safe pair of hands.
It sounds like a business transaction rather than any
Yeah.
kind of romance, or it's just very practical. How can we merge these two families and keep everyone moving forward?
And again, I keep harping to Bridgerton because it's in the popular culture and people will hopefully understand it. There's a family in the Bridgertons called the Featheringtons who are much more focused on business. They're much more focused on trying to get the best for their family through means. And that's
Okay.
because their father died. So
Oh, I
their financial
see.
resources are a bit shaky. And so I can totally get where the girl's mum is coming from because that's Lady Featherington, basically. Doesn't mean it's a good thing. It just means it's a sign of the times and she's doing what she
Yeah,
needs to do.
working in the society they're living in. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Perfect. George Norton was trained as a barrister, but he didn't practice. He and his family were strong Tories, whilst the Sheridans were more aligned to this Whig party and were seen as radicals. It sounds like Caroline didn't accept the marriage straight away. She tried to go another season because her younger sister was coming up, basically. So she was like, I'll give it
Right. She
another
had a little
go.
time.
She had a little time, but it didn't make any difference. And Caroline later made her decision to marry George Norton on the 30th of June, 1827, in Hanover Square. She was 19 at the time, so baby, and he was 26. So there's a slight age gap. George Norton became an MP for Guildford, which is like South London, and Caroline knew that something wasn't right because she waited that year. She was trying to look at the field, and I think she knew because their political opinions are so different. I think she had an underlying current that something wasn't right. So eventually she conceded because she wanted the well-being of her family to be taken care of, basically. So it was a decision she made for the family, not for herself. In all the articles I've read, it's called an unfortunate marriage, which I
Oh.
don't know if that's like a term of the time, but it was in most articles. An unfortunate marriage. All I can deduce is that it was a marriage that was doomed from the start.
Okay.
Basically,
Just
there wasn't
not a
much
good
hope.
match.
Yeah, exactly. Norton didn't like Caroline's cleverness or wit. I think he saw it as a threat. He would discuss none of like political or public or private affairs with her. He just did cut her out of all those like
Mm.
decisions completely. Like I said, the political sources were a source of friction. And also, he didn't like how close she was with her family.
Huge red flag.
Yes.
Oh,
He didn't like her going to see them. And because they encouraged this radical political stance within her, he was
oh my
like,
God. Dude, marry someone else. You knew.
within a few months of their marriage, George started to drink excessively and he resorted to physical violence in some disputes. Sometimes these physical violence attacks, I will be calling them, were so bad that the servants had to step in and intervene.
Oh my
And
God.
if we know anything about servants from that period, it is that you are seen and not hurt. You are not
Yeah.
meant to step in. Yeah, so it must have been so bad for the servants to feel like they had to. A lot of their arguments were based around lack of money. Their financial pressures increased with the three sons that they had. So they had a boy called Fletcher, a boy called Brinsley, and the youngest was a boy called William. Their financial situation was so bad it got to the point where Caroline was forced to support the family with her writing.
Oh.
So she'd published a couple of books and they were well received. Like I said earlier, she was really talented in this area. She even had an appointment as editor of a magazine, two magazines. One's called La Belle Assemblée and one's called Court Magazine.
Hmm.
With these appointments and publications came the idea that she could have money, she could earn her own money, and that independence crept in, which I imagine aligns really nicely to this radical political stance she's been brought up with.
And the fact that she has value. It's
Yeah,
financial, but also bringing something to society when he's trying to box her away and shut her down. So
yeah,
the circumstances let her be her.
for sure. With this independence and this really deteriorating marriage is, and this is important to note for the story, it's more than likely that she had an affair with the current Home Secretary at the time and later Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne. There was gossip around the High Court that surrounded Caroline, and this understandably humiliated George.
Mm.
You're an MP and your wife's playing away with the big dog.
Oh, that's oh
Yeah,
yeah,
he was
that's
humiliated. Although it is noted that he initially encouraged this relationship for political gain. So
oh,
he
so
saw
go
it
over
as a leg up.
there and like flirt, butter him
Mm,
up a little bit. And she
yeah.
went, Okay, all right.
If you want me to,
I
Georgie,
understand the assignment. Yeah,
I
okay.
will. Which also shows that if that's all he's letting her in on, so if he's not letting into any private and public affairs apart from go and flirt with that guy, you can see how she would rise to that occasion.
Oh.
Caroline's relationship did deteriorate with George, and she ended up leaving the marital home in 1835. But then she actually returned, which she knew she was returning to an unsafe place when George denied her access to her boys. So he
Oh.
said, if you're leaving, you can't see them. In March 1836, after yet another quarrel, George locked her out the house. So it is, it's bad. It's really unsafe
Hmm.
and dangerous.
Unsafe in a time when you have so few options if you're her.
Yeah.
It's hard in any time, but in a time where you have no autonomy, no easy, straightforward path to an earning potential, and you have children in common, and that's
Yeah.
desperately frightening.
Yeah, for sure. And it's those children that are the catalyst to so many parts of this story. He also sold off her possessions. So anything he's doing to
Oh
punish her,
my
he will.
God. So this is what in a modern context we're calling coercive control, isn't it? He's using the things that she loves and values to punish her or to steer her towards behavior that he wants.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Horrific.
And imagine trying to leave in that situation. Like it's
To
just,
what? To where? Yeah, like
yeah,
what
exactly.
options? And then even if you had all the resources of a modern woman, there are children. And what
Mhm.
then?
Yeah. Caroline refused to keep out the marriage. So she went back, she tried, and it just wasn't working. He then put Caroline on trial for adultery.
Oh.
And at the same time, in June 1836, he also sued the then Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne, claiming he had an affair with Caroline. So he is just throwing absolutely everything at this.
I'm not sure he comes out of that as well as he might have thought he did.
George wanted to prove his wife Caroline had committed adultery because this would be the first step of obtaining a divorce. He also wanted to plot the takedown of the Whig government. Lord Melbourne was a Whig. He aligned with these values.
Oh, so this suits his agenda right across the board.
Yeah,
Old
there's a reason
George.
he's going full hog in this
Okay. All right. This
situation.
is,
Yeah.
yeah, it's making sense.
Okay, great. So this court case happens where they put Caroline on trial. Do you think the court case was fair or do you think it was sexist?
It feels unlikely to have been fair, just on the face of it.
Shock horror. So it wasn't. There
Oh,
was, there was a few things that made it sexist, according to The Difficult Women, the book that I found. If a husband was denied domestic harmonies and affections, he was entitled under law to basically have access to Caroline's vagina through a
oh,
marital contract.
oh.
So because she was playing away, it denied him access. for domestic harmony.
Oh my, I don't even know what to say about this. So they're
It's
talking about
disgusting.
this in a court as though they're negotiating the use of a car.
Property. Yeah, 100%.
Wow.
Yes. And because you've denied me access to this vagina, I am going to ask for, in today's money, £10 million worth of damages.
That's some vagina. Wow. Okay.
All the lawyers and the judges and the pamphleteers in the trial were male. The only women that were in the whole case were Caroline's servants, and that's because she had witnessed he beat me up. The problem with having servants in a trial in those times was that servants were deemed an unreliable source.
Oh.
So the only women in that trial were unreliable sources, according to Times. The lead counsel promised George that this was to be a public case to bring down Caroline, so he made it as public as he could.
So he wanted to humiliate her. He didn't
Oh,
just
yeah.
want, okay, yep.
Yeah. And part of the case was that one of George's servants testified that Caroline showed a quote unquote thick part of her thigh when the Prime Minister was sat in a chair on a visit.
So she could have done something as simple as adjust her skirt, and suddenly we've got this little rat man saying, "Yeah, yes, she showed her
That's
thigh."
enough. That's enough for my £10 million, actually.
Don't look. Oh, okay.
Yes, the book's difficult with him and lists all these reasons as to why the case was sexist. Melbourne obviously was counteracting this because he's the Prime Minister, he wants to save face. He was successful in his defence, but that didn't change the fact that Caroline's reputation was completely ruined. She was labelled a scandalous woman. She was written about in newspapers and parodied in cartoons.
Mm.
And even though the Nortons had separated, Caroline remained under George's property. All that this
Oh,
suing had done was make it harder for Caroline to divorce George. She was unable to divorce him because she had no legal rights. The other problem with this suing and the idea of divorce is that the existing law automatically gave custody of children to their father. Automatically.
oh, wow.
Yeah. This suing just did nothing to help anyone by the sounds of it. Lord Melbourne has come out unscathed. Caroline was also worried that George thought that the younger two children were actually Lord Melbourne's, and therefore he would inflict the pain that would have been on her, because he used to beat her up so bad, would be then inflicted on the boys.
This is a nightmare. This
It's
is an
scary.
absolute nightmare.
So at the point she's out of the house and George has the children, all those motherly instincts and all the things I've spoken about at the beginning of this podcast are just, she's desperate to make
Mm.
sure her kids are okay. She would hang around at St. James's Park, hoping to glimpse her children if they were travelling somewhere. She would convince, I put in brackets, probably bribe, footmen to let her see her children, obviously when George wasn't there. The summers, George took the kids to Scotland to see his sister, and Caroline would guess which dock they were sailing from to go from London to Scotland to try and even get a glimpse of them, to see them from afar. Sometimes, heartbreakingly, she would get the wrong dock, so she missed them. It was all just a guessing game. And this is all she can do. This is all that is in her power to see her children. At the same time, George and his family are actively turning the children against her. For example, one of the children was beaten for reading a letter from her mother. Sometimes the children were even whipped.
This is horrific.
Yeah, it's really dark and classic using children as a pawn. These tropes that you hear through society even today.
Mm.
This is evidence that this was happening and men did this. George at least did this. So, what did Caroline do? She used her skills. She had to make a change. She's a published writer. We know that because she financially supported her family when she could. And we knew that writing was a powerful, persuasive tool of the time. It was. Have you seen in Hamilton where they do the pamphlet song, where they're like,
Yeah.
it's a,
Mhm.
that was the way you got traction and news back in those times,
So this is
having
like your
persuasive,
social media sharing. You're like
right?
sending these things out there,
She was like,
getting
I'm going to
people
do it.
interested.
Yeah, I need to tell people about this. She wrote to her friend casually. She's friends with Mary Shelley.
As you
of
do.
writer fame. Yeah, it's high time, she said in a letter. The law was known to at least the weaker sex, which gives us no right to see our own flesh and blood. So she was like, women don't know that this is what they're entering into when they enter a marriage. They don't know what
Mm.
contract they're signing. Her aim was to educate the public about this law and how it affects mothers, and also persuade MPs to support the case. So what she did was she wrote two pamphlets. The first one was published in 1837, and it had a very jazzy title: Children as Affected by the Common Law Rights of the Father, which
Okay.
is just what it says on the tin, I guess,
She
naturally.
wants to be taken seriously. She's putting it in serious terms.
Yeah. It argued, the pamphlet, that all children under the age of 7 should remain in custody of their mother, and that the decision as to where the older children should live should be decided by the court, not the father, in the case of marital breakdown. She made 500 copies of these pamphlets, and then she circulated them privately. So she was like cherry picking the right people to read the pamphlet.
Sympathetic people who might
Mhm.
be persuaded or might already hold
Yeah.
sympathetic views.
At the time, people said, I don't think this is a good idea, Caroline. And when she showed people their drafts, people thought that it was maybe too angry. She kept that anger in the pamphlet. And the reason she did that was because she didn't want to sound weak. She just wanted to create awareness. She then published a second pamphlet, which was more focused on how children were being used as weapons in marriage, right? This one was called The Separation of Mother and Child by the Law of Custodies of Infants Considered, which is such very jazzy names for a pamphlet.
And
Um,
yeah, serious again, serious coming in with the kind of dry,
really
legal,
dry.
non-emotional, but I wonder if she's counteracting something there because the assumption is, oh, she's just a woman. It's going to be too emotional. And maybe she's deliberately choosing these
It's a
things to
deliberate choice, 100%.
strategic,
Yeah.
clever, very clever.
I've got a quote here that I can read you. The father's right is absolute and paramount and can be no more affected by the woman's claim than if she had no existence. So she's saying the current law is I might as well not be alive. Like, I might as well not be here.
I think that's such an important piece of context, isn't it? Because it lays it out. There is literally no mitigation. There is no allowing for the fact that he might have done wrong and I might not have. I simply do not exist in this legal
Also,
framework.
how depressing. God. Yeah.
Hmm.
And then to top it all off, she also noted that there was like this double standard. So if you weren't married, if for whatever reason you had a child out of marriage and your children were quote unquote bastard children, that they are automatically given to the mother until age 7. So she was like, I was better off not marrying and having these children outside of marriage.
Hmm.
Married men could forcibly seize their children even if they quote unquote were infants at the breast. So even if you're breastfeeding, the dad can say, you're mine. I'm not giving you to the wife at all. But if they were unmarried, it'd be completely different.
I wonder here, in a way, she's leveraging that against the system and saying, look, this, I'm not a feminist. This is just against nature. And
You've hit the nail on the head entirely. It's so true. And it also points out that there's no mechanism for leaving because you've confined me to this marriage. I'm trying to do everything you tell me to do. I'm trying to be the good woman, but you've made this, and I can't be the mother that I should be. And I'm trying to do what you tell me to do, society,
yeah,
basically. Yeah. She used these pamphlets to lobby, and she asked, because she is well connected high society, she asked the lawyer and MP Thomas Talfourd to sponsor a child custody bill through Parliament. He did do this. He was on board. The pamphlets were persuasive enough for Thomas to get on board, but the custody bill failed in Parliament. So she's trying to fight for these laws to be changed and lobbying really big, heavy stuff. But at the same time, she's in this ebb and flow of hoping to see her children.
mm,
It sounds utterly exhausting.
Yeah.
George would promise her a visit or sometimes even custody, give her all that hope, and then he would withdraw it. He would rip it away. Um,
Oh, liking him
sometimes
less by the second.
he's awful. Sometimes he would organise a visit and not even show up. He sent the kids to boarding school and didn't tell her. And all the time, these children are getting older and older. They're getting infected with all the stories that are being told about their mother to them while she's fighting for this bill to go through. It's
Wow.
heart-wrenching. She continues this struggle until finally in 1839, she wrote a letter to the Lord Chancellor on the Infant Custody Bill. Because of this letter, the Custody of the Infants Act was finally passed.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. By which legally separated and divorced mothers who had not been found guilty of adultery were given custody of children under 7 and granted regular access after that.
Oh my gosh. So this is a tremendous outcome. And she could have easily given up. She could have walked away. She would have been exhausted, as you say,
Yeah.
but
Mate,
she
she changed the
pushed.
law.
That's incredible.
She changed the law. Now, this law didn't affect her actual home circumstance. It did not restore Caroline's access to her children because the law only applied in England, Wales, and Ireland. And where does George's sister live?
Oh, Scotland.
Scotland. So he took the kids to Scotland so she could not
Oh,
claim access.
he was determined to
Yeah.
punish her.
So the battle continued until one day when the youngest of the sons, William, fell off a horse. And whilst they were in Kettlethorpe Hall, which is a little fancy hall in Lincoln, he fell off the horse, hurt himself, and he developed tetanus. By the time the word got to Caroline, she races over to Lincoln, and by the time she gets there, the 9-year-old was in his coffin.
Oh my God.
So,
Oh, the
um,
poor woman. Oh my God.
yeah, that's according that wording I've kept in. The 9-year-old was on his coffin because it's such a stark word, and I kept it in from the source because it was so good. This horrendous loss seemed to soften George a little bit, and he allowed Caroline to see her children at Christmas. So it softened him a little bit. Definitely not what we were hoping for or what we were fighting for, but she was allowed to see her children. Caroline finally gained share custody of her children in 1841. Lots of negotiation happened between William dying and 1841, where they actually managed to get to an agreement, but it took one of the children dying to get there.
Wow.
Yeah. That didn't stop Caroline with her law movements, though. She kept pushing for law reform throughout her life, and this was heavily influenced by her experience with George. In March 1852, so like a good 10 years after, George cancelled Caroline's money, so allowance, and he refused to honour his liabilities for her bills. So part of marriage back then was that you keep your wife, you have to pay. And he also, because she's a published writer, right? He
Hmm.
managed to redirect that money from writing into his bank account. So not only is he saying, no, I'm not paying for you, he's saying, whatever you create yourself, I want as well. He was legally entitled to do that.
Wow.
Unless the only way he wouldn't be allowed is if there was a prenup that was agreed, but there wasn't in this case. All wife's earnings and property belonged to the husband. That was law.
That's
And
wow.
they're still
Okay.
not divorced at this point. I think it's important to say, like, it's
I
still,
see. It's
um,
still up in the air. So he's got
yeah,
that hold over her financially.
yes. Because if she was on her own, she would have no legal identity. So Caroline was unable to sue him or be sued herself, technically, raise her own contracts, receive legacies, or even make a will. However, in 1853, she asked her creditors to sue George on her behalf. So she said, you do the suing, but do it on my behalf, which is a very clever switch around. Caroline defended herself in court. She represented herself. And she, because of all the work she did with the pamphlets and the lobbying and everything else, she was supported in court. There were cheers of that in court. But that doesn't mean the case was won. George won the case on a
Hmm.
technicality.
That's unfortunate. given that
Yeah.
she had that momentum and she had the charisma and charm of a girl who'd been a debutante. So she
Yeah.
knew how to work a room.
Exactly. And we said right at the beginning, she's got wit and she's got these political values, and she clearly had skills and knew how to use them, right? Because they're in high society, and I said earlier that the press absolutely scandalized Caroline, her time in court was also picked up by the press as well. The issues of their marriage, so George and Caroline's marriage, was written about in papers for weeks.
Mm.
Caroline used this momentum and began to campaign for changes in the law relating to married women's property. Again, she turns back to her trusty pamphlet. This one is called English Laws for Women in the 19th Century, which I feel is a better title. I feel we're improving on the titles as we get through. Okay. This one was published in 1854. And then she used the power of her story to persuade Parliament and the chosen people she's given these pamphlets to. She also casually writes to Queen Victoria at the time, and she explains very eloquently in her letter to Queen Victoria about what has been going on in her circumstance. And this had direct influence on the Marriage and Divorce Act of 1857. This Marriage and Divorce Act abolished some of the inequities to which married women were subject to. It contained 68 clauses, and four of those directly came from Caroline's pamphlets. So, what she wrote in those pamphlets actually got put into law.
That is extraordinary
Isn't
considering
it?
she's not a lawmaker. She's just a human being who's gone
Yeah.
through this absolutely unfair set of
It's
circumstances.
amazing. Yeah, and it made me so happy to be like, they directly came from Caroline's pamphlets. These included women's rights to form a contract, to receive maintenance as directed by the court, to inherit property, and to keep possessions of her own earnings. So she is now allowed, because of this act, to keep the earnings that she made from her writing.
Oh, that's wonderful news because it's just plain common sense. It's just fair. So go,
Um,
Caroline.
It's really important that in this letter to the Queen, she is not seeking female equality. She even wrote, "The natural position of women is inferior to men. Amen. I never pretended to the wild and ridiculous doctrine of equality." So she's just saying within a marriage, women should have rights. She's not saying those rights are equal. She's not saying outside of marriage, those rights are equal. She's just saying that the idea of marriage, it doesn't give me any right. I'm probably better not being married.
Can I ask you, and this
Yes.
just purely speculation,
Yes.
do you think that she truly believed that? Or do you think that she was playing the game?
I hope she was playing the game because it shows a much higher level of intelligence.
It's
And
cunning, yeah.
yeah, but my gut feeling is no. I think she did believe that
She was of
because
her time.
she fought her entire life to change acts and fight for law changes. Why would you not, therefore, fight for the law of equality? If you're going to dedicate this much time to it, why would you not go for equality?
That's
That's my
really
only
interesting.
reason.
Yeah,
Because
I
this is a
get it. I get
lifelong
it.
battle. Her youngest was 9 when he died. This is not just a couple of years of, this is her entire life's work. And I wonder, therefore, if you're going to dedicate that much time to it, you're going to make sure it's for the thing you believe in, right?
That makes absolute sense.
Yeah, but
Yep.
I don't
Yes,
know.
it
That's just
does.
my gut feeling. It's a shame, but I think it's true. Like I said, she just wanted to establish that women be written into law, basically, because at the time they just hadn't been written in at all and were denied so many things. She just wanted to make sure that women had a place in law, which is a great starting block, isn't it, to therefore fight for equality. And it is very clear that none of the rights that we have today would be without Caroline and her fight, right? We know that. There's a very clear linear progression of women in rights and law. Because of her right for property that she now has, Caroline secured a lease to 3 Chesterfield Street and wrote a really lovely letter about her move that she finally could own property. And it's described in one of the articles as a wistful correspondence.
Mm.
3 Chesterfield Street actually has a blue plaque at the minute, and it marks the house where she lived for over 30 years. She was never able to divorce George. It never supported that. Because Caroline had left George and gone back to him in 1835, she was never allowed to divorce him. However, in 1859, they eventually agreed like separation. So they
Okay.
came to, much like the custody agreement, they came to a deed, if you like, of this is how it's going to work from here, leaving her to live as she wished, so freely, as long as she was unmarried.
Okay, so I guess you're George, you're thinking, I no longer get to garnish her income. If anything, she could theoretically cost me money, so I'll wave that away, but my ego won't withstand her remarrying. So
Mm.
those are my terms.
He had his claws in deep. They were
Hmm.
deep and they would not let her go. Yeah, that is the story of how Caroline Norton allowed women to be acknowledged in law.
What, wow, I'm coming away from this with two kind of thoughts. And one of them is that she is a kind of case in point that someone doesn't have to align with every single value. She would have had arguments with the suffragette women who came after her with she would have argued against their theories, but she still advanced the overall well-being.
She
And
really did for so many
it's
women.
it's so important to acknowledge
Yeah,
those people who make those steps, even though they might not align with you perfectly, they still
yeah.
are doing the good work.
It's very
Um,
much how I feel about Churchill because Churchill has done so much for British history, of course, but he stood against the suffragettes. He
mm,
didn't believe in votes for women. And it's always such a tussle, isn't it?
there's
Mm.
some tricky things about him with race relation, with
Yeah,
women's rights, and so on. And yes, so you see him lauded as a hero, and you think, mm, but you can't take away from the accomplishments at the same time.
yeah.
I did say I had two thoughts, but the other one seems to have flown away.
Oh, that's okay. I got a little kind of finisher here. So, Caroline's battle was forced upon her by unfortunate marriage, but underestimated. She was the catalyst for change for women in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. But we don't know her. She's completely written out of history. So, it's such an important story to share. And it was just a mother's love that drove it all.
If he hadn't been such an absolute shithouse,
Arse.
the world
Yeah.
might have been worse, which
Yeah.
is a terrible burden for her to have
Yeah.
carried.
He's
He's
definitely the
hard to
baddie of
love.
the story.
He
So,
is. I bet
yeah.
he
And
had the
if,
mustache that he would twiddle.
oh, so quite an emotional one today. Sorry about
Yes,
that.
it was.
Thanks, Cara.
Thank you, Vicky. I think we should plan a trip to go see her blue flag, a field
Mayfair it is
trip.
in. Mayfair,
Oh,
baby.
yes, count me
Yeah, let's
in.
go. Let's do it. Sounds great. Thank you very much for listening
Thank
and
you. Please
do
like
it.
us. Please rate us. Please subscribe. Please share with your friends. We are She Changed History, and we would love to have your support.
And we'll see you next time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.